Hello everybody, this is Fernando for the latest Cryptids and Monsters video. Alright, let's go ahead and let's start chapter 2 of the wonderful Occult Investigator, Real Cases from the Files of Ex-Investigations book by Bob Johnson. I've seen the analytics associated with all of the other past videos, and they've been very good, very promising. Good views, good comments, good engagement as well, good outreach. So definitely I'm going to continue this book going forward. I'll include the link below in case you wanted to read the book for free. It's still available there on that website. And that way you can read ahead of time or read it as I'm reading it out loud here. This one though, chapter 2, has to do with a exorcism. In fact, when I was reading some of the parts of the chapter itself, it looks like it's going to be a very interesting chapter involving the Vasquez's. So in this case, chapter 2 is called Norma Vasquez's Afterlife Detective. So let's go ahead and let's start part 1 of chapter 2 here, and then I'll do the rest of it throughout other parts as well. So here's essentially what that chapter states. Paul Vasquez had been cheating on his wife Norma for nearly 2 years, and like most lowlifes, he thought he'd never be caught, especially not by his father-in-law, who died 4 years before the couple had gotten married. The young Bronx mother of 3 knew that Paul was having a torrid affair with another woman, ruining her marital relations and causing her family great distress. Each time Norma confronted her husband, he flatly denied any wrongdoing, and when pressed, he either completely ignored her or became so agitated that Norma feared he might become violent. The situation was so out of hand that she could no longer ask him anything about his life outside of their Bronx apartment. He would flail his arms, scream at her, and then throw things around their cramped apartment at the mere mention of his private life. But Norma's accusations were not unfounded. On many occasions, she found love notes in his clothes, and he'd often stay out late and return smelling of a woman's perfume. Norma lost count of how many times the phone rang, and as soon as the other party heard her voice, there was a hang-up and a dial tone. All the classic signs of philandering, albeit sloppy ones. But despite Paul's uncaring attitude towards his family or his arrogance about being caught, he never bargained that his wife's major ally would turn out to be her father. Not so out of the ordinary, one might think, but Norma's father had died of a massive heart attack before the couple had even announced their engagement, and he returned from the dead to apparently set matters straight. One Friday evening, after a particularly nasty argument with Paul that let Norma bruise through physical and emotional stuff, in a fit of panic, she ran to her closest relative in her Bronx neighborhood on East Tremont Avenue. Aunt Carmen had liked and protected Norma since she was a child in their middle-class world. Carmen knew how the other children's teasing affected little Norma, who, although slightly overweight for her age, had stunningly pretty Latin features and flawless skin. She would tell Norma not to cry about being teased and that one day she would grow up to be a beautiful woman who all of the men in the world would want to date, and that she would be married to a wonderful man who would care for her for the rest of her life. But Paul, Norma's high school love and eventual husband, was not that man, and in fact was nothing but a constant source of misery to her. So Norma's cry for security once again went out to Aunt Carmen, whom she knew would make things right. Norma was at the end of her rope when she visited Carmen that Friday evening to ask for help. She knew that Carmen was a wise woman, but she also remembered the many neighborhood stories about Carmen's quote-unquote powers, her ability to use the magic of Santeria. Norma had spent hours at the neighborhood Botanica, a store that caters to the metaphysical needs of the Hispanic community, watching her aunt console the locals with sage advice, special instructions for the use of charms and powders, and of course the candle magic offerings to the Catholic saints that most of the faithful knew could right almost any will or any ill. She was sure that Carmen had a potion or candle that would help make Paul change his ways or uncover the identity of this other woman who he was running away from in terms of the family life. She could at least then confront that woman and find some closure. And Carmen didn't disappoint her niece. She provided Norma with her strongest talismans and mixtures. She used the reading of animal parts and bones as she performed her most powerful candle magic, offering many devotions to the particular saints known to help in overcoming family and marital problems. But nothing worked. Paul continued to play around, Norma was abused, and their children suffered. Carmen told Norma she had one last chance. We must ask for help from the other side, my child. We must seek the advice of the dead. They can see all on this earth. You must ask them or your life will continue in pain. It is your only resort. Our telephone rang at X Investigations just before 7 p.m. on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving holiday of 1999. Silvana, my check assistant, had already left for the weekend, and I was gathering the paperwork I was planning to look over during the holiday to prepare for my lecture on using occult magic in the business world at the Borough of Manhattan Community College the following week. I hurried to answer the phone in hopes that it was a telemarketer so that I could begin my holiday, but Carmen Garcia's urgent plea in broken Spanish to assist her and her niece using the quote-unquote eyes of the dead was too intriguing and fascinating to blow off for another turkey day. This is X Investigations. Carmen asked for a moment. You are knowledgeable about the afterlife and how we can summon the dead to help us? It was a good 30 seconds before I could get a word in edgewise. Carmen at least let me answer that this was in fact X Investigations, but the moment I said that I understood her plea, she cut me short and began to ramble about her niece Norma's domestic predicament and that they had exhausted all known regular and magical aids. I managed to discover that they wanted to conduct a seance to contact someone that Norma trusted to help uncover why Norma's husband Paul was cheating on her and with whom. It is very important to my niece and her children that we take care of this problem soon, Carmen said. I have used all of my magical knowledge, but nothing is working for us. I laid down my briefcase and sat back in my chair, resigning myself to the fact that I wasn't going anywhere this Thanksgiving Eve. I discussed at length Carmen's knowledge of the occult, especially the ways of Santeria and what spells, talismans, and so on she had tried to overcome Norma's problem. Carmen was indeed an expert in the ways of her craft, citing ancient tribal remedies and ceremonies that I knew were authentic from my prior research into that field. She told me of the Orishas, the gods of Santeria, and the offerings she sacrificed to them. She also hinted at the ways of voodoo and the necromantic powers of controlling the dead. But what struck me most was how defeated Carmen sounded. She was obviously concerned with her niece's welfare, but she was also frightened of something else. I later discovered that Carmen had a twofold reason for wanting to conduct a seance that involved her own occult powers as well as Norma's requests. This made the case that much more interesting to me, so I decided on the spot that X Investigations would assist Carmen and her niece in their attempt to contact the other side. What I didn't bargain for was that my decision would put Silvana's and my sanity in jeopardy and our lives in danger. I asked Silvana to call on Norma the Friday after Thanksgiving at her home in the Bronx. I thought talking to another woman would make Norma feel more comfortable in this delicate situation. Silvana expected to meet with a worried mother and wife, but she didn't expect to see and hear the strange occurrences in the apartment. The interview began normally with the standard question and answers. We typically ask about any religious beliefs, mental illnesses, superstitions, and so on, so we can weed out any preconceived prejudices the subject might have regarding our work. Silvana then asked Norma why she had requested a seance, since there are many regular investigative techniques available to nab a philandering husband. Or Norma could have opted to use our regular clairvoyant means of tapping into unknown realms. But Norma reminded Silvana that Aunt Carmen had tried all of her magical skills to no avail. Then, curiously enough, Norma became reticent and just stopped in the middle of the conversation. "What is wrong, Norma?" Silvana asked. Norma raised her head and in a teary voice said, Very strange things are happening here. It is my father who died many years ago. He comes into my room at night when I am sleeping, and he is very angry with me. He has always hated Paul, and now he is punishing me for Paul's lustful behavior. I am very frightened. His cold hands touch me, and the dark closes in on me. At that very moment, Norma began to scream and clutch at her chest. Ay Dios mío, my neck, the marks are coming again. Sylvia was stunned to see stalagmite welts rising on Norma's skin right above her breasts. The welts looked like finger marks squeezing into the flesh. He does not want me to talk to you. He doesn't want you to help me. My father is very angry because I did not heed his warnings about Paul when he was alive. After Silvana calmed Norma, she called me on her cell phone. She recounted what just happened and said that Norma not only wanted to contact her dead father for help, but she also needed to be released from his ghostly grip. Norma was haunted on earth by her husband's misdeeds and by her father's spirits. Robert, we must act quickly or Norma will become possessed. I felt a very powerful presence in the room with us. It is deep and very angry of anyone near Norma. She is in danger. We will also be in danger. You must know this before we begin, Savannah said in her heavy East European accent. I told her we would discuss it further in the office and asked if she was safe at the moment. He knows I am clairvoyant. This one knows I can reach him and force him to come to us. He has touched me already, Robert, Savannah said in a disturbingly unfamiliar voice. I could tell that she was very worried. We later learned that there were other strange things happening at Norma's apartment. Personal items always related to Norma and Paul's marriage were missing. Pictures of the family would mysteriously develop spots or be blown off the mantle, and Norma's engagement ring simply disappeared. But the strangest of all was Norma's recounting of the last time she had sex with Paul. She said it was normal intercourse. Paul had never been a very considerate lover and was prone to jumping on Norma in a missionary position and stroking until at least he was satisfied. But this night, at the very moment when he entered her, Norma oddly took notice of the old 8x10 black and white photo of her mother and father on her bureau. She said her father's face seemed to enlarge at first as Paul pushed and then exploded off of the photo as Paul entered her. The giant face shot out of the photo like a Hollywood special effect with bulging red eyes and sweating brow. The gruesome head undulated and circled the room, eyes peering down at the couple, mouth slobbering and spewing forth vile comments that only Norma could hear. Although embarrassed at the bizarre tale, Norma forced herself to explain to us how everything burned as though there was some caustic chemical that had been poured onto her. And so the more Paul pushed, the more she burned from the inside. The entity screamed at Norma, "You are getting what you deserve. He is evil. He will burn your soul." And so Norma put her head down as she told the story and then cupped her face in her hands, frightened and near the end of her rope. We knew we had to help, but I was troubled by the facts, or should I say the lack thereof. Things just didn't add up in my mind. Carmen's magic hadn't helped, yet she wanted us to conduct a seance, something she would have certainly been prepared to do herself, considering her occult powers. And Norma's father, with whom she had a good relationship until Paul's arrival, was turning into a malevolent, haunting being that was seeking to harm that young wife. And yet both women wanted us to conduct a seance to contact Norma's father and help indict the husband. Something was fishy in the spook world. When I mentioned my concerns to Savannah, she said that I was the occult expert and that she was only the medium. I can feel things, Robert, but you must do the brain work, she said. Well, what did you feel about the two women? Anything out of the ordinary? I asked. And so Savannah shot back almost flippantly. Oh, yes. The dead, they already speak to Carmen about this problem. What? I was surprised that Savannah hadn't mentioned this before. But then this was our very first real analysis of the case, and I had to admit that I was preoccupied by Norma's grief over the damage to her family life. But Savannah's comment raised further suspicions about the women's requests. It also sparked an idea. who would conduct a seance under the guise of wanting to contact the deceased father. Savannah could use her clairvoyant powers to feel Carmen's association with the afterlife and perhaps give us a clue as to the real motives behind the seance request. And then that's it. That's everything, at least with regards to part 1 of chapter 2, called Norma Vasquez Afterlife Detective. I'll save the other part for another video here. Let's talk about this part here though first. Interesting stuff, no? In this case, who knew that the actual supernatural stuff could even go into the world involving common affairs? So obviously in this case, you had this poor woman, Norma, who was essentially trapped in some kind of marriage with a husband who was philandering around, and then obviously like making it open, like he didn't even seem to care at that point, even though she had her high suspicions. And then you had her aunt named Carmen, who was involved in the supernatural, and that she in turn was trying to use, at least in the beginning, some of her ways, some of her occult ways to be able to change things, but then that wasn't working. And then the third angle involving the father in this case. Here you had a situation where Norma's father, who interestingly enough, and it was something curious on my mind too, they got along when they were alive, but he hated the husband, and he made it well known, at least until the point, obviously, when he died. But then afterward, in the afterlife, now he's coming back, but not terrorizing the husband, but instead terrorizing Norma. Interesting stuff. Now, it makes you wonder why he's doing that. If he loved his daughter, especially towards the end, as far as his face exploding from that photo and then hovering over and then going into all kind of weird mannerisms, why it wasn't doing it to the husband that was cheating and prominently doing so and harming his daughter at the same time, and not just emotionally but physically. I guess we'll find out right on part 2 of chapter 2 to see essentially why this occurred, also why, as Bob Johnson mentioned correctly, why they were being tasked with the seance when Carmen, the lady again that could do the magic, the aunt, why she wasn't able to do something along those lines either. Interesting stuff, interesting little preview of what could happen with the rest of the chapter. But let me know what you guys think. Post those comments below. All right, everybody. Thanks again as always. Take care. Bye.